everyone. This is the message for the Parsha this week, which is Parsha's Terumah, but it's the Shabbos before Purim. It's Parsha Zachar, and our minds are on the story of Purim, the holiday of Purim, preparation, the celebration of Purim, which of course will look very different this year, just as this Devar Torah, this drasha, this YouTube sermon is also very different for the auspicious occasion of Shabbos Parsha Zachar. So as we come closer in the days ahead, we think of the story of Purim, perhaps one of the most outstanding points of the holiday within the Megillah, within Megillus Esther, the fact that the Almighty's name, Hashem's name, is not mentioned at all. This is an important lesson for us because sometimes the Almighty can appear to be hard to find. Almighty can sometimes, Hashem is difficult to really perceive during certain days and happenstances and occurrences in our lives. I want to share one part of this story of the Megillah where I think the emunah, the faith that comes out of the Megillah is so ripe, it's so important, because we see, even though Hashem's name is not mentioned and there is no overt miracle like the splitting of the sea, there is still the Yad Hashem, the Almighty's hand, so to speak, not literally, guiding the Jewish people, showing us his love, Hashem's love for the Jewish people and the continuity of Am Yisrael. So let's skip to the 6th chapter, Perek Vav, in Megillus Esther. There, perhaps the story changes and the Jewish people's story changes for good. Achashverosh can't sleep, as we know. They read him from his chronicles. They come across the personality of Mordechai. They realize Mordechai's great service and sacrifice for the kingship, for his royalty, for Achashverosh, and how his life was spared because the conspiracy, the attempted coup, an assassination was thwarted due to Mordechai's intellectual abilities, his knowledge of many languages, his skillful tactics. And so Achashverosh wants to reward him. And the Megillah tells us, Psukim, Tanakh say, that immediately Haman, who was there close to the king, as was often the case, is called in. He's told to honor Mordechai in a very dramatic kind of way as the story unfolds. And there we are with our analysis of this part of the story. Haman is walking around, dragging the horse, shouting for all the people in the street how great Mordechai is, how much Mordechai ought to be rewarded due to his intense loyalty and his fealty to the kingdom. And at the end of this marching, at the end of this parade, Haman is weary. And he gets to the part of the city where he passes in front of his own house. And here the Gemara tells us, and without the Gemara, we can't understand the story. The Gemara tells us that Haman's daughter came to the top of her house, the roof of her home, of Haman's home, Haman and Zeresh's home. And the daughter takes the chamber pot from the bathroom and dumps the contents on the head of Haman. Why would she do this? So the Gemara explains that obviously she thought it was her father who was being paraded around. Who in her mind could be more deserving of wearing the royal garb, of having this honorific and having this procession than her father? And she wanted to make sure that whoever had to lead her father around would be degraded. This was her character. These were her attributes in the negative. The Gemara tells us that when Haman looked up to see who had done this to him, she saw that she had humiliated her own father. She was so startled. She fell from the roof. She died. And this is how we know how this is all true in terms of the oral tradition that was passed on. How did the Gemara know that this is what happened between the lines? And so the Gemara tells us, look carefully at the words. It says in Pasuk Yud Beis Nidchaf that Haman went home. He was full of disgrace this whole day of parading around his greatest adversary, his enemy, Mordechai, the one who he hated most in the world for representing this righteousness, this concept of Torah. And it says that Haman hurried home El Beiso, and then listen to the next word, Avel, mourning, Avelus. Why was he mourning? Of all the words to choose of his disgrace, he was mourning because, very simply, he had lost his daughter. He had lost his dignity. He lost his daughter, all in the same moment. Chafui Rosh. What's her? Why focus on his head being covered? Because of the contents of the chamber pot. So this is the tradition as has been passed on, and this is the real meaning. And we'll try to understand why that's so important. Now, the Ben Ish Chai, in this setting known as the Ben Yehoyada, the leading scholar in the 1800s in Iraq, he says, tell me, Haman's daughter? She didn't recognize her father's voice? He's shouting the whole day. Shouting the whole day. This is the man who the king looks to honor. Talking about Mordechai. She didn't recognize his voice? She didn't recognize his face? Why would she do such a thing? And he's completely perplexed. The Ben Ish Chai says, she didn't recognize Mordechai. She couldn't see Mordechai. Everybody knew who Mordechai was. In Haman's family, the great opposite, the great competitor, if you will, political adversary, ideological opposite. She didn't know who Mordechai was. And so he explains very significantly to understand the extent of the Yad Hashem, the extent of the Almighty's intervention in our continued existence. He says this was the end of the day. Look, he said, look at the psukim. Soon after this, he has to go to the dinner party, which we'll get to. This was the end of the route that they were on. And so, Mordechai was very weary. His head was down. Why was he so weary? He should be jubilant. He said, because Mordechai is fasting. He's fasting for the success. And he's fasting to be of support, to be of moral support, to be with Esther in this dangerous mission that she's on, to confront Achashverosh about this plot, this plan, this decree against the Jewish people. He's fasting out of solidarity. And so he's very weary at the end of all of these celebrations. I shouldn't say celebrations, but this whole parade that had gone on. And Haman's voice, it was the end of the route, as we see here, which is obvious from the psukim, from the verses. Haman's voice was hoarse at the end of the day. It was the lowest He had been screaming the whole day because of the command of Achashverosh to treat Mordechai with such respect. And he had it. He had lost it. So she couldn't hear his voice all the way in the street level, and his head was down. And he was shouting at a very low volume, and his head was down. Why was his head down? His head was down because he was supposed to be up and coming rising star within Shushan. And he was embarrassed that this was his job that he had to do, to be leading around a horse, to be leading around a Jew on a horse. So he kept his head down as much as he possibly could out of shame. And so his daughter couldn't see. And his daughter took action accordingly. And immediately we're told after this, Saper Haman Lezeresh. At the end of the day, Haman told his wife everything that happened. And he told his whole household. And you know what Zeresh says? Lo tuchal. You cannot defeat Mordechai. Imi zera ha-Yehudim. He's from the Jewish people. She realized, and she got it first. Undefeated. Not enough power to subvert the Jewish people. Lo tuchal, she says. You can't do this. And so she's going to tell him, give up. It's over. You know what? Get lost. Because you have to save face. Go run away for a while. Escape. Events are not in our favor. That was Zeresh's advice, her advice to her husband, Haman. And alas, he was making plans. But then, as the verse tells us, and as the Ben Yehoyada explains, Odam medabrim imo. What are those words? Why does it say Odam medabrim? While they were still talking. It's explicit in the pasuk. Sarise hamelech. The royal attendants of the king came to collect Haman, to put him in the royal carriage to take him to this dinner party where events unfolded. And Esther was successful in lobbying Achashverosh to go ahead and to get rid of Haman, who was trying to kill her and her people, as comes in the subsequent chapters. Oda Medabrim. So he couldn't run away in accordance with the advice and the plan of Zeresh. He was collected immediately in his filth to go to the king. Why is this all so important? Number one, the Almighty is there. These events, what transpired, is unbelievable. It could only have been part of a divine plan. And it's hard for us to see at the time because the Almighty is not perceivable to the senses that we have. But we use our mind to understand the Almighty's presence in our life continuously. And this Haman needed to have a complete and utter demise and destruction. Imagine his followers would have continued his plan and his mission to destroy the Jewish people. But such a collapse, such a fall from grace, a fall from power, in such an ignominious fashion, that utter destruction was what was necessary to convince everyone in Shushan who was ready to jump on the Jews and attack the Jews, violate and violently get rid of the Jews. This was what they needed in order to quell that, in order to stop that from happening, in order to discourage that kind of attack and war on the Jews. Lastly, we just need to understand, most simply of all, that the Almighty loves us. The Jewish people have a unique mission. We are a part of that mission. And this little snapshot of the story of Purim is one way of appreciating and understanding how every part of the Megillah has this deep message, the Almighty's presence and relevance in our story as Klal Yisrael. and so latent within the Torah in so many different ways, and especially here when it comes to the story of Esther and the Megillah, what Mordechai wrought on our behalf. So we have a deep appreciation for how much is involved in making sure that despite our small size, that who we are, what we are, the ideas we represent, persists, perseveres. We do that along with this amazing, powerful partner of the Almighty. So the Almighty is there even when it seems bleak and it seems difficult. That's the inspiration of Purim. This story is representative of the whole story of Megillah's Esther, and indeed the whole story of the Jewish people throughout history. Thank you and have a great Shabbos.